Hey guys, it's Gary. I just did a video 2 days ago. I'm gonna maybe try to do more frequent videos and maybe have them be shorter. Though today, hopefully the music's not too loud in the background. I guess my primary reason for doing this today is to thank Axel from Germany once again, all of our mutual friend who sends tons of stuff out to people. I got another VCLT package from him today, which was yesterday, I think, yeah. And I've actually listened to all three things that he sent. Sent a lovely little note saying a few days after I made my Halloween video, he was in the secondhand shop and he saw one CD in particular that reminded him of me talking about the music that I like at Halloween time. And he said that he thought of me and that it was something for my collection, which I very much appreciate. And actually, two of the things could kind of be Halloween themed. He sent me basically two classical CDs, and the only one that really has no Halloween affiliation with it is this from the Sunday Express. Now this is interesting because I know in England, I didn't realize they do this in Germany, I think that's a newspaper, and I think once a month or once every season or so, sometimes some of these newspapers actually give out, I've read about this, free CDs. Why does nobody do that in America? Because in America you get nothing for free. That's basically what it comes down to. And I think that's what one of these are, because I see the Sunday Express thing. It's in one of the CD, what do they call it? The wallet, the cardboard slipcases, whatever they call them. And this is Express Classical Collection featuring the Four Seasons, which I only actually have one full recording of. I think I showed it in an old video. I think the first classical CD that I ever bought was a budget version of the Four Seasons. I could be wrong. No, that was Water Music. I stand corrected. But there's this is essentially a compilation, but a compilation, interestingly, of pieces that I think most people that don't even know classical music would know. But it's got, I gotta crank the lights up here though. Serenade in G major. So it's got Mozart, Toccata and Fugue in D minor. I stand corrected because the Toccata and Fugue in D minor is actually very famous for being used in horror movies. So actually all three CDs that I'm about to show do kind of have a bit of a Halloween, that season, that vibe to them, connection. And I thought this was the one that was the exception. But now that I see Toccata is that, and I've listened to all three of these, but I listened yesterday primarily. So it's got a chunk of Swan Lake in here. Beethoven Sonata number 14 for piano in C sharp minor. The Largo from Dvorak's New World Symphony. I guess that's New World Symphony. Now I know Axel in particular is a fanatic of Dvorak, and he's actually turned me on to a whole bunch of Dvorak things that I hadn't heard before. And actually, he caused me to pull out. I had a Dvorak CD, a full CD of pretty much, I think it's just a Dvorak music, and not necessarily one of his better known ones. I forgot that I had that, and Axel kind of forced me to just through his love of Dvorak, I pulled it out and gave that a listen, and I loved it very much. And it's a little bit unlike what most people know of Dvorak, which I guess would be the New World Symphony, which is a pretty thing, but he's got things that are a little bit darker than that, which I really like. This has Strauss Blue Danube Waltz, Clair de Lune from Debussy, everybody knows that. Vivaldi naturally is on here. quite a good CD, very easy to listen to. Nothing too dark or challenging, but lovely. And it's incredible because I think these, because these are, it says promotional. I read about these just a few years ago. I learned that in England in particular, there's a newspaper that's fairly famous for putting out, I guess in one of their Sunday editions, I don't know how often, once a year or 3 or 4 times a year, they stick free CDs in with their newspapers, which is just fantastic. It's something we never do in America, because in America you get nothing for free. But specifically in England, I can remember, I guess it was Virgin Records, decided to give away the original Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, the original 1973 version of it. And I think they put it in a cardboard envelope like this. And they actually gave away, like millions of free copies of it. And Mike Oldfield himself got pretty damn upset at that. Because obviously the regular version was very much still available for sale then and now. And they did that with Tubular Bells one time. And I think it was almost like Virgin Records giving a big FU to Mike Oldfield, because I think at the time he was about to get back the rights for all of his Virgin era stuff, where he had some kind of contract where after 25 or 30 years, I guess it was maybe 30 years, the rights of his works, those original Virgin albums of his, reverted back to him. So now Mike Oldfield releases them himself. And I think it was just before the expiration of that period, when Virgin still had the rights to it, they decided to give away the original Tubular Bells, which is probably the most popular thing he's ever done. So even though Mike Oldfield's had tons of releases and tons of record sales, I don't think anything ever got up to the sales numbers of Tubular Bells. So I don't think he'd be too happy that millions of copies went out to people for free. The other thing, which is, this is a funky. This is almost like one of those trifold. Look at it, it's got 4 things here. Pictures of an exhibition, which I had shown. Get this note out of here. This CD, which I don't think I have any of these. This is a very neatly packaged. It's all cardboard, and the CD goes in here under this little. It attaches to that little flap there. Very interesting. But it's pictures at an exhibition, and I showed that in my Halloween video because it seems like fairly often pictures at an exhibition, for whatever reason, also gets paired up a lot with Night on Bear Mountain, Rimsky-Korsakov. And oddly enough, it is on this CD as well. And besides Pictures at an Exhibition has its moments of darkness, Night on Bear Mountain is something that was also used very, very, very often in horror movies. Especially, and not tongue-in-cheek at all. I mean, seriously, it's a nice dark piece of music, which I love. And so I guess Axel saw this and picked it up for me. And I don't, I only have one full version of Pictures at an Exhibition. Not counting, I think Tomita did a version, which I have. But Tomitas are so far away from the original that it almost doesn't count. And I do have Pictures at an Exhibition, and I think I only got one full version of it, though. And obviously there's differences in every orchestral version. And I'm not sure what year this one was recorded. This is a Decca, which is, Decca was very well known for being a quality classical label. And I don't see. Oh, it looks like the recordings from 1972. The interesting thing for folks that like classical music, like me to some extent, but aren't experts, it's always interesting. And what I always do is when I get a CD like this, I'll go online and find this exact version and see what people have to say about it. Because classical nuts, classical fanatics, very interestingly, will sit and argue about, and sometimes violently, about what the best version is. Oh, the 1959 version of this conducted by so-and-so was much better than the 1970 version of blah, blah. You know, these people are so passionate over the different aspects of the versions. And the interesting thing, too, is that everywhere in music, everybody's talking about the latest and greatest, and if a new version of something comes out, everybody's attention goes toward that. With classical music, it's not unusual to see a new issue of something like this that may be reissued, in modern times. And you're seeing, a recording made in 1959, 1967. I was looking at some of the recording dates on, I guess it's the other disc, the one that I just showed. That had recording dates on there. A lot of things were taken from 1961 and the early 60s. And I think with classical music, there's these hardcore fans. And it's always interesting to me. And they will go through the decades and listen to things that were recorded in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And, there's no shortage of versions of these things that are still being recorded today. And these people compare the versions, and the funny thing is these people all reading off of the same scores. There's obviously no improvisation, and they're reading off the same scores, all these musicians. And yet there's these subtle differences, and these fanatics really, really listen closely to these subtle differences. And sometimes it's a tempo thing, and sometimes it's the way something's recorded. The bass end of something or the horns might be emphasized more in one recording versus another. And it's interesting to see these people argue back and forth and just compare, because they're like scientists. And most of them are not even music professionals. They're just hardcore fanatics that sit and really analyze these things. And when you see some of the commentary that these people, put in their reviews of classical works, you think that, wow, I thought I really listened closely to the music I listened to, but I don't know that I could pick apart things to that extent. Maybe I can in my own music. I don't know, in my own music that I really sit and listen a lot to, like jazz artists or whatever. But it's always interesting to read what people think of these. And I, don't have a lot of versions of this. I only really have one other orchestral version. Sounds great to me. And then the extras are the Night on Bear Mountain is on here also. There's a couple other pieces by Rimsky-Korsakov as well on here. It's a good 60-something minute disc. But the primary pictures at an exhibition recorded in 1972, and some of the extras are from 64, which just goes to prove how well certain interpretations are thought of in the classical world. And it's good to see that when something is well recorded and it's good, it continually stays out there. It doesn't get bumped off, just because people have recorded versions since then. Now on to the silly stuff. This is the one specifically that Axel saw that made him think of me, because he saw this. This is a soundtrack to the second movie version of Little Shop of Horrors. I did dump it in my computer. It's kind of silly, to be completely honest with you, but I knew that going in. It's all songs done in a 1950s style, even though all the songs are from the 80s. Now, I kind of know, without being a fanatic of the Little Shop of Horrors, I know a bit about the history because I'm a horror movie fanatic, especially from the 1960s. The Little Shop of Horrors originally was not a musical. It was a 1960 low-budget auteur Roger Corman movie, depending on how much people know about B horror movies, American horror movies from the 50s and 60s, but a little black and white public domain movie. The interesting thing with Little Shop of Horrors, the original 1960 movie, which was not a musical, it was a tongue-in-cheek comedy horror movie about this talking plant that basically eats people, is what it comes down to, is that it fell into the public domain years ago, which means that anybody can literally manufacture video cassettes or DVD copies of it and sell it, because the copyright owners have basically given up the copyright. And as a result, TV stations can also play the movie without having to pay anybody to play it. As a result, it gets a lot of TV airings because nobody has to pay for the rights to broadcast it. It's an old movie now, but when I was a kid, it used to come on quite a bit. And actually, even now, especially around Halloween, the original black and white 1960 movie version by Roger Corman still comes on at 2 or 3 in the morning, especially around Halloween time, especially on independent stations, and even like public PBS stations show it in the middle of the night because, like I said, they don't have to pay anything for it. As a result of that, it was one of the first movies I ever saw come out on video cassette that you could buy. I bought a video cassette recorder back in the late 70s, and this was before rental stores even popped up, even before you could buy movies. It was a couple years later that they started marketing video cassettes for sale, but there weren't a lot, and Hollywood was very hesitant to do it. So the only things you could get for the first couple of years was public domain movies. So Little Shop of Horrors was one of the first things you ever saw for sale on video cassette. And because it is public domain, anybody can put it out. There's 55 versions of it by 55 different companies, and it's still something you can pick up on DVD or whatever. And then it got, oddly, I knew the original, growing up in the 60s and 70s, I was aware of it. And all of a sudden in the 80s, somebody decides to make a Broadway play about it, which was surprising. And living right outside of New York City, I was very aware of the play going on because it was put on in New York City. And I was amazed when I saw it all those years later that it had been made into, a play, and this time a musical play, very much tongue-in-cheek, in the mid-'80s. And the play was successful and played out for a long time. And that's where I caught little snippets of the music that's on here, or at least some of it. Very, very silly kind of 50s songs, done 1950s style, in the style kind of that if the original was a musical, this is the kind of music it would have had because the 1960 was the first version of the movie. So they did the kind of kitschy music to that, 1960s style when they did it in the mid-'80s. And then the Broadway, that thing ran for a long time, I seem to remember. And as a result of that, the Broadway play was so popular that they made another movie version out of it, based more on the Broadway play. So in, I think it was 86, they did the second movie version of it, and that version is also a musical. So it's more based on the play than the original motion picture. Now, oddly enough, as much as I know about it, and the very first movie version had an early role by Jack Nicholson, a small part in it, before anybody knew who he was. He was just an extra, kind of. And he played a nutcase in there, which I've never seen Jack Nicholson not play a nutcase. Now, for all of that history that I know about it, because I love these B movies from, the black and white era and everything, I actually never saw the entire full movie. I would catch little pieces of it here and there. And just because Axel sent me this CD, which I listened to and I dumped in my computer, like I said, I actually went on YouTube and I actually just watched the original 1960 movie in full for the first time. And it was actually a hell of a lot funnier than I thought it was. And there's a couple weird coincidences because I had forgotten the main guy that owns a flower shop in it, where all the action takes place in this guy's flower shop, was this guy named, an actor named Mel Wells. Mel Wells later on, interesting career this guy had. He was even a radio DJ at one point. He was an actor. He had a PhD in, I think it was psychology or something like that. Years later, he went, even though he was born and raised in New York, he went and lived in Europe, where he actually directed some B-horror movies in the late 60s, early 70s. And these B-horror movies that he directed, I'm a big fan of. And I had kind of, in my mind, known him more as a director than an actor because I'd only seen him in a couple things as an actor. Well, going online, I've just realized that I've seen him as an actor in more movies than I realized, but his physical presence doesn't stand out that much, so you might not notice, oh, that's Mel Wells. But one of my favorite movies growing up as a kid was this 1957, I think it is, movie, also by Roger Corman, who made the original A Little Shop of Horrors, called Attack of the Crab Monsters, which I love very much, and it turns out Mel Wells was in that as an actor. But he went to Europe in the late 60s and directed some movies there, some B-horror movies, and I love these B-horror movies. Yes, I have very little taste when it comes to stuff like that. And I wouldn't watch a new Hollywood movie. You'd have to tie me down and pay me, probably inject me to watch them. But B movies, from the 60s and 70s, I'll watch, especially European ones, not American ones so much. But Mel Wells, really the lead actor in the original Little Shop of Horrors, directed some of these late 60s horror movies that I love very much. And it just goes to show how one thing leads to another. Just because Axel sent me that soundtrack, it made me not only watch Little Shop of Horrors, realize that Mel Wells, who's hilarious in the movie, is really pretty much almost the main character in that. And then I got remembering Mel Wells as a director in these other movies, and even though he died in 2005, he had put up a website in the last few years of his life where he talked about his career. And I sent him an email one time, or I just posted up an email on his website mentioning how I really liked those B movies that he directed. And I was surprised to actually get an email response back from him. And I thought, wow, this guy's a cool guy, I'd kind of forgotten all that. And just from Axel sending me this whole Little Shop of Horrors soundtrack, just made me go back to the original 1960 movie and remember all that stuff. Now, here's another weird VC coincidence that goes on to continually happen to me, and I guess others as well, in the VC. So I'm actually watching the full original 1960 Little Shop of Horrors, really for the first time in full. And I see that the music was written by Fred Katz. I'm like, I know that name. Now, oddly enough, just recently, I started listening to a lot of Chico Hamilton Quintet recordings from the late 50s, maybe early 60s. Well, Fred Katz was, and Chico Hamilton's quintet at that time was very innovative and got a lot of acknowledgement because one of the 5 members in the group, besides having Jim Hall on guitar originally, was a cello. And a cello player was Fred Katz. And I said, I wonder if this guy that wrote the original soundtrack music to the original 1960 Little Shop of Horrors. Now, this isn't the 1950 style pop songs. This is, regular movie instrumental soundtrack. It was written by Fred Katz. So I went online and double checked, and sure enough, it's the same Fred Katz that I just recently started listening to again. This is the Fred Katz that was the cello player in the Chico Hamilton Quintet, who went on to have this really long career, and also as a music teacher in colleges and universities as well. As a matter of fact, and I didn't know this until today, he did a whole bunch of soundtracks for Roger Corman movies at about this time. And it's weird how all this got triggered just from Axel sending me the Little Shop of Horrors soundtrack, because without that, I wouldn't have gone and looked up the original movie. I wouldn't have found out that Fred Katz had done the soundtrack for that. And it's just another weird, VC coincidence that I've been listening to Chico Hamilton Quintet recently from that period specifically. And the reason that I got into listening to them again, because I listened to that quintet about 25 or 30 years ago for the first time, was because Jeff from the VC sent me a compilation disc of classic jazz, probably going back to the 40s all the way up to the late 60s, early 70s, and from his LP collection. And some of the things scattered in there, and there's a lot. I'm talking about it's almost 200 tracks of things from his, just a compilation of about 200 tracks, actually about 190 I think was the total, of his classic jazz era LPs. And a few things that he threw in there I really loved, and I'm listening closely, and I'm hearing cello, and I'm like, oh, I bet that's Chico Hamilton. And then when I took the disc back home, and I looked it up because I was playing in my car, when I looked it up, I found out that, yes, I was right, that's the Chico Hamilton Quintet, and that's Fred Katz on cello, and damn, that sounds good. I haven't heard that for years. So it caused me to go look up Chico Hamilton, put a whole bunch of his Fred Katz and quintet with cello era music in my wish list to buy, but also I went on YouTube and I just found a whole bunch of those albums up there on YouTube to listen to, specifically that era of Chico Hamilton. Chico Hamilton's always worth listening to, but that quintet started with Fred Katz on cello and Jim Hall on guitar. But even after they left, he kept that lineup the same. He had another cello player when Fred Katz left, and another electric guitarist, and Chico Hamilton on drums and bass, and a horn player. Interesting band, really interesting band that Chico Hamilton had for quite a number of years, and did quite a bit of recordings. Even though the membership changed, he kept the instrumental lineup for a whole bunch of years the same, with the cello and electric guitar and horns and bass and drums. Really interesting band. And just one of those coincidences that the VCL kind of feeds into, this whole Little Shop of Horrors thing just triggered a whole bunch of other things connected to the VC and things that I've been listening to lately. So quite interesting there. Okay. So thanks, Axel. Once again, thanks. And I'm wondering if, I don't think I'll show necessarily this, but I'm wondering if that's he wrote his note to me on a pad that looks like it might actually be, I'm not sure, it might actually be from the place that he works, so I'm not going to show it. But I'm not sure if it's just a pad he had laying around the house, or whether it's actually a pad from his business that he works at. I'm curious about that. So once again, thanks, Axel. All these things are in my computer, which means they're permanently there for me to listen to. I really don't take things out of my computer if I can avoid it. Oh, by the way, to whatever extent you can hear it, and I don't know how loud it is, this has been playing in the background for the entire duration of this video. So I'll be back. I have worked on a little bit of music. I don't know, if I'm really making any real progress with it, but I will let you know. I really want to have something done sometime in January. I was aiming for January 1st. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. But I have been working on this back on this piece that I started months ago that involves all virtual instruments using like classical orchestral sounds and strings and horns and flutes and things like that I don't play. And I've been working on that again. Making a bit of progress, but it's very slow. And I've actually kind of gone back, and I wasn't too happy with the beginning of it, so I'm trying to zhuzh it up a little bit. I'm not deleting things out as I'm trying to add stuff to it to make it more worthwhile the first couple minutes of the piece. And so that it looks like might be the thing that gets released. And that music that was playing in the background of my last couple videos where I was playing my own music might actually end up coming out later. And I thought that was going to be the next thing out, but I don't think that's going to be it now, because I've got a large-scale electronic piece which isn't really getting worked on at all. That's got to fit in there. That's got to get done before that can come out. And if I can stay on this classical thing, I would like to get that finished. It's closer to completion than the other piece that's going to go on a separate CD. And it would be nice to have that out, because the other piece that's going on there, which is an electronic piece, so it's going to be a real balance of things that sound like an orchestra and acoustic instruments, even though it's not, with a piece that's entirely guitar synthesizer. And I forget, it's like 4 or 5 guitar synthesizers. That's a very long electronic piece that I recorded like 4 years ago and I knew I was just holding on to put onto a future CD release. And it's really the only archive thing I have that goes back that far that I'm going to release. And it was just a question of I just didn't have anything else to release it on. And it's something that I very much want it to be out there, even though it's this 23-minute electronic piece that doesn't go anywhere intentionally for the whole duration. It basically, where it begins, it's where it's at in the middle and at the end. But I like those kind of pieces. I like long pieces that occupy one space, and when you listen to them, you kind of lose track of time and how long have I been listening and what's going on, because there's no rhythms or anything in there. So it's something that I very much have wanted out there in the world, and I've waited 4 years to have some companion pieces to go with it. And so if this classical type piece does get done, I'm going to have basically a CD of 2 long pieces is what it comes down to. I hope I get that done, assuming I don't join the 56 Club, and that's, you know, my prior video. Okay, guys, I'll be 31 minutes. Wow. I'll be back for, you know, talking probably about music albums next video. But I wanted to get this and say thanks again to Axel for sending me some more quality stuff that I am listening to. So thanks. Hope everybody's doing well, and I'll probably be back in a couple days. Take care.